The young SAS recruit froze mid-step when he saw the tattoo. Hidden just beneath the collar of the Royal Guard's uniform, barely visible as the man adjusted his stance, was a marking that made Tommy's blood run cold. 3 intertwined serpents with Arabic script underneath. Tommy had seen that exact tattoo before, burned into his memory from classified briefings. It belonged to Ghost Unit, a special operations team that officially never existed. The same unit his older brother had been investigating when he disappeared in Syria 2 years ago. The Royal Guard stood perfectly still at his post outside Buckingham Palace. Red uniform pristine, bearskin hat, casting shadows over his weathered face. Tourists walked past, snapping photos completely unaware that the man they were perfing might be one of the most dangerous soldiers alive. Tommy's hand trembled as he pretended to check his phone. He was supposed to be on leave, just another tourist in London. But seeing that tattoo changed everything. This wasn't coincidence. Men with Ghost Unit tattoos didn't become ceremonial guards. They were killers, trained for missions that left no witnesses. The guards' eyes swept the crowd with mechanical precision, but when they landed on Tommy, something shifted. For just a moment the mask slipped. The guard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his right hand moved slightly toward his ceremonial sword. He knows, Tommy thought. Somehow he knows I recognized him. A group of schoolchildren ran between them, blocking Tommy's view for precious seconds. When they passed, the guard was looking straight ahead again, but Tommy caught him speaking into his collar microphone. Too quiet to hear, but the message was being sent. Tommy's training kicked in. He needed to get away from the crowd fast, but as he turned to leave he noticed something else that made his stomach drop. 3 more guards had appeared at different positions around the palace courtyard, all moving with the same fluid precision, all speaking quietly into their radios. This wasn't a coincidence either. "Excuse me, sir." The voice came from directly behind him. Tommy spun around to see a plainclothes security officer, earpiece visible, hand resting casually on his jacket. "Could I have a word?" Tommy's mind raced. Running would confirm their suspicions, but staying might be worse. The security officer smiled, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. "Just a routine check, sir. We've had some concerns about suspicious behavior in the area." "I'm just a tourist," Tommy said, keeping his voice steady, taking some photos. "Of course. Mind showing me some identification?" As Tommy reached for his wallet, he caught sight of the original guard again. The man was watching their interaction with intense focus, one hand now definitively resting on his sword hilt. The other guards had also with Ethan forming a loose circle around the area. Whatever was happening here was bigger than a simple case of mistaken identity. These men were coordinating like a military unit, not palace security. And somewhere in that coordination was a connection to his brother's disappearance. The security officer examined Tommy's military ID with unusual interest. "SAS, is it? On leave?" "That's right." "Interesting." The man's smile widened, but became somehow more threatening. "We don't get many SAS recruits taking solo tourist trips to the palace. Usually you boys travel in groups." Tommy realized with growing dread that they already knew exactly who he was. "Follow me, please," the security officer said, but it wasn't really a request. 2 more plainclothes men had appeared from nowhere, boxing Tommy in with practiced efficiency. They led him away from the main tourist area, toward a side entrance he'd never noticed before. The original guard with the tattoo fell into step behind them, having been relieved by another uniformed soldier. Up close, Tommy could see more details: scars on the man's hands, the way he moved with absolute silence despite his heavy boots, eyes that constantly scanned for threats. "Name's Wilson," the guard said quietly as they walked. "Though I suppose you've already started figuring out who I really am." Tommy said nothing, but his mind was working furiously. Wilson. He'd heard that name in the classified files about Ghost Unit. The team leader who'd supposedly died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. They entered a nondescript building through a heavy steel door. Inside looked nothing like the historic palace exterior. Modern security equipment, reinforced walls, and the unmistakable feel of a military facility. This wasn't a tourist area. This was an operations center. "Sit," Wilson instructed, pointing to a metal chair in what appeared to be an interrogation room. The security officers took positions by the door, while Wilson settled across from Tommy at a small table. "Your brother was asking a lot of questions before he disappeared," Wilson said without preamble. "Questions about Ghost Unit, about me specifically." Tommy's blood turned to ice. "My brother's dead. Car accident in Manchester." Wilson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what they told you?" Michael Henderson, age 28, intelligence analyst, died when his car went off the M62 in bad weather. Wilson leaned forward. "Your brother never owned a car, Tommy. He was afraid of driving after that crash when you were kids." The room seemed to spin. Michael had been terrified of driving ever since their accident at 15. He took buses, trains, anything but cars. Tommy had always thought it odd that he'd supposedly died in a car, but the grief had made it hard to think clearly. "Where is he?" Tommy managed to ask. "That depends entirely on how smart you are in the next few minutes," Wilson replied. "Your brother discovered something he shouldn't have, something about what Ghost Unit really does, what we've been doing since we were supposedly disbanded." Wilson pulled out a tablet and showed Tommy a photograph. It was Michael, but not dead. He was sitting in what looked like a cell, very much alive, but clearly imprisoned. The timestamp showed it was taken just 3 days ago. Tommy lunged forward, but the security officers were faster, slamming him back into his chair. "He's alive," Wilson continued calmly, "but his continued survival depends on your cooperation. You see, when we learned that little brother was also SAS, we realized we had an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" Wilson stood and began pacing. "Ghost Unit didn't die in Afghanistan, Tommy. We evolved. We became something much more useful to certain people in power. People who need problems solved quietly, permanently." "You're talking about assassination." "I'm talking about necessary work, political problems that need cleaning up, witnesses who know too much, investigators who get too close to sensitive information." Wilson's eyes fixed on Tommy. "Like your brother." The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Ghost Unit hadn't been disbanded. They'd gone private. A Black Ops assassination team operating under the cover of ceremonial duties at the palace. Who would suspect the Theti guards standing at attention? "We have a problem," Wilson continued. "A journalist who's been digging into some very sensitive government contracts. She's supposed to have an accident next week. But we need someone clean to get close to her first, someone with no connection to us." Tommy felt sick. "You want me to help you kill her? I want you to help us save your brother's life. And perhaps prevent some very embarrassing information from becoming public. Information that could destabilize the government." Wilson slid another photograph across the table. A young woman with dark hair, probably mid-30s, getting out of a car outside what looked like a newspaper office. Rebecca Morrison, investigative journalist for The Guardian. She's been tracking defense spending irregularities that lead directly back to Ghost Unit's private contracts. If her story runs, a lot of powerful people are going to prison. Tommy stared at the photo. "And if I refuse, your brother dies, and we'll find another way to handle Miss Morrison. A messier way that might involve her family as well." The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning. Tommy realized he was trapped in a scenario with no good options. Refuse, and Michael dies. Agree, and he becomes complicit in murder. But there might be a third option. If he could get close to this journalist, maybe he could warn her instead of killing her. Maybe he could find a way to expose Ghost Unit and save his brother at the same time. "What exactly do you need me to do?" Tommy asked. Wilson smiled, and Tommy immediately regretted asking the question. "Miss Morrison has a weakness for military men," Wilson said, pulling up more files on his tablet. "Divorced last year from an army captain. She's been frequenting a pub called The Crown and Anchor in Islington, popular spot for off-duty military personnel." Tommy studied the additional photos. Wilson showed him Rebecca Morrison at the pub, laughing with friends, looking relaxed and unguarded. She was attractive, but there was something sharp in her eyes that suggested she wasn't easily fooled. "You'll strike up a conversation, get her interested. She's working late nights at the Guardian offices, getting close to publishing her story. We need to know exactly what she has, who her sources are, and when she plans to go public. And then she has an accident. Happens to journalists who dig too deep sometimes. Tragic, really. Wilson slid a phone across the table. This is everything you need. Background information, photos, her schedule. You have 48 hours to make contact and gain her trust. Tommy pocketed the phone, his mind already working on how to turn this situation to his advantage. What guarantee do I have about my brother? None, Wilson said bluntly. But I'll tell you this much. Cooperate fully and he lives. Try to play games with us, and you'll get to identify his body. The security officers escorted Tommy out through a different exit that led directly onto a busy London street. No trace of the military operation he'd just witnessed. Within seconds he was just another person in the crowd, except for the weight of the phone in his pocket and the impossible choice he'd been given. Tommy found a coffee shop and sat in the corner studying the files Wilson had given him. Rebecca Morrison was more than just a journalist. She was relentless. Her previous investigations had brought down corrupt officials, exposed military contractors, overcharging the government, and revealed cover-ups that went to the highest levels of power. Her current investigation was different, though. She was tracking money-specific payments to a private military company that didn't officially exist. Ghost Units Cover Company. If she could prove the connection between the fake company and real government contracts, it would expose not just the assassination team but the officials who hired them. Tommy's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Remember, we're watching. Don't disappoint us. The trap was tighter than he'd realized. They probably had surveillance on him right now. Any attempt to contact authorities would be seen immediately. But maybe that could work to his advantage too. He made his way to the Crown and Anchor, arriving just as the evening crowd was starting to gather. Military personnel were easy to spot, the way they sat, how they scanned rooms, their careful positioning near exits. Tommy ordered a pint and settled at the bar, watching the door. Rebecca Morrison arrived at 8:30, just as Wilson's intelligence had predicted. She looked tired but determined, greeting the bartender by name before taking a table in the corner. She ordered wine and pulled out a laptop, apparently planning to work while she relaxed. Tommy waited 15 minutes, then moved to the bar closer to her table. As he passed, he deliberately knocked into her chair. "Sorry," he said, turning with an apologetic smile. "Clumsy of me." She looked up and he saw those sharp eyes assess him immediately. Military haircut, bearing, probably the way he'd moved through the room. But instead of annoyance, he saw interest. "No harm done," she said. "You're military? SAS, on leave." He gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Mind if I sit? Looks like we're both drinking alone." She studied him for another moment, then nodded. "Rebecca Morrison. And you are?" "Tommy Henderson." He sat down, noting how she filed away his name immediately. A good journalist's habit. What brings an SAS soldier to a pub in Islington on a Tuesday night? Same thing that brings a journalist, I'd guess. Sometimes you need to be around people but not really with them. She smiled at that, and Tommy realized Wilson was right about her weakness for military men. But he also realized something Wilson might not know. She was evaluating him just as carefully as he was studying her. "What kind of journalism?" Tommy asked, though he already knew. "Investigative, military contractors, defense spending, that sort of thing." She watched his reaction carefully. "You'd be surprised how much fraud there is in military contracts." Tommy felt the weight of the phone in his pocket, knowing Wilson was probably tracking his location. But he also felt something else, an opportunity to turn the tables. "Actually," he said, leaning forward slightly, "I might not be as surprised as you think." Rebecca's eyes sharpened with interest. "What do you mean by that?" Tommy realized he was at a crossroads. He could play Wilson's game, slowly gaining her trust to betray her later, or he could take a massive risk and trust her with the truth. Looking at her intelligent, determined face, he made his choice. "Can we go somewhere more private?" he asked quietly. "What I'm about to tell you could get us both killed." Rebecca studied his face for a long moment. She was clearly debating whether this was legitimate or some kind of setup. Finally, she closed her laptop and stood. "I know a place," she said. They left the pub together, and Tommy noticed at least 2 people who seemed to take unusual interest in their departure. Wilson's surveillance, just as he'd expected. Rebecca led him through several streets, taking turns that seemed random, but were probably designed to spot anyone following them. She stopped at a small bookshop that appeared to be closed, but she had a key. They went inside, and she led him to a back room filled with filing cabinets and computers. "This is where I do my real work," she said. "The Guardian offices are too public for sensitive research. Now what's this about?" Tommy took a deep breath. "My brother disappeared 2 years ago while investigating a private military unit called Ghost Unit. I was told he died in a car accident, but today I discovered he's still alive, being held prisoner." Rebecca went very still. "Ghost Unit. I've been trying to prove they exist for months." "They exist, and they've been operating assassination contracts under the cover of ceremonial duties at Buckingham Palace." "Jesus." Rebecca sat down hard in her chair. "Do you have proof?" Tommy pulled out the phone Wilson had given him and showed her the photo of Michael. "This was taken 3 days ago. They're holding my brother to force me to spy on you, find out what you know and then kill you." Instead of fear, Rebecca's face showed excitement. "This is exactly what I needed. Someone on the inside who can provide testimony." "You don't understand," Tommy said urgently. "These aren't regular soldiers, they're killers. The man who recruited me supposedly died in Afghanistan 3 years ago, but he's very much alive and running operations out of the palace." Rebecca was already pulling files from her cabinets. "Wilson, right? That's who you met with?" Tommy stared at her. "How did you—" "I've been tracking him for months. David Wilson, former SAS captain, supposedly killed in action in 2022, except his death was suspiciously convenient, right when Parliament was starting to ask questions about Ghost Unit's activities." She spread photographs across the table. Wilson in his Royal Guard uniform, Wilson meeting with men in expensive suits, Wilson at locations around London that corresponded with several suspicious deaths over the past 2 years. "I've been building this case piece by piece," Rebecca continued, "but I couldn't prove the connection between the ceremonial guards and the assassination team. You just gave me that proof." Tommy felt a mixture of hope and terror. "They said you were close to publishing. How close?" "I was going to run the story next week, but without concrete proof of Wilson's survival and current activities, it would have been largely circumstantial. With your testimony and this photo of your brother, I can blow this wide open. And get us both killed in the process." Rebecca looked at him seriously. "Tommy, if we don't stop them, how many more people die? How many more journalists, whistleblowers, investigators disappear or have convenient accidents?" She pulled out another file. This one thicker than the others. "I've documented at least 12 suspicious deaths in the past 18 months. All people who were investigating government corruption or military contracts. All deaths ruled accidental or suicide." Tommy looked through the files, seeing patterns he hadn't noticed before. A whistleblower who allegedly jumped from his apartment balcony. An accountant who supposedly had a heart attack while jogging. A parliamentary aide who died in a hit-and-run accident. They're systematic, he realized. This isn't just about covering up Ghost Unit. They're eliminating anyone who threatens certain people in power. Exactly. And my investigation threatens to expose the whole network, not just the assassination team, but the politicians and officials who hired them. Tommy's phone buzzed with another message. "Status report required. Don't keep us waiting. They want an update." Tommy showed Rebecca the message. "What do I tell them?" Rebecca thought for a moment. "Tell them you've made contact and she's interested. Buy us some time while we figure out how to turn this around." Tommy typed back, "Contact made. She's interested. Working on gaining trust. Need more time." The response came immediately. "You have 24 hours to get the information we need. Don't disappoint us." 24 hours, Tommy told Rebecca. "After that, they'll either move on you directly or assume I've betrayed them and kill my brother." Rebecca was already moving, pulling out laptops and phones. "Then we need to move fast. I have contacts at MI5, people who've been suspicious about some of these deaths but couldn't get authorization to investigate. Wilson will be watching for any sign that I've betrayed them. Not if we're smart about it." Rebecca smiled grimly. "We're going to give them exactly what they want, right up until we destroy them." Tommy felt a spark of hope for the first time since seeing Wilson's tattoo. What do you have in mind? We're going to let them think they're still in control, while we build a trap they'll never see coming. Rebecca's plan was audacious and dangerous. Over the next 6 hours, they worked together to construct an elaborate deception that would hopefully save both Tommy's brother and expose Ghost Unit. The key is making them believe they're winning, Rebecca explained as she copied files onto encrypted drives. Wilson thinks he's using you to control me. We're going to let him think that right up until the moment we spring the trap. She had contacts throughout London's intelligence community. People who'd been suspicious about the recent string of convenient deaths, but lacked the authority or evidence to investigate. Rebecca had been quietly building a network of allies, and now it was time to activate them. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen at the Met, Rebecca said, showing Tommy a photo. She's been tracking what she thinks is a serial killer targeting government whistleblowers. She doesn't know about Ghost Unit, but she knows the deaths aren't random. Tommy studied the photo. You trust her? With my life. She's the one who first suggested the deaths were connected. Her superiors shut down her investigation, but she's been working on it, unofficially. Rebecca made a phone call, speaking in careful code. When she hung up, she looked satisfied. Chen will be ready with backup when we need it. She's bringing people she trusts completely. The plan was complex but elegant. Tommy would continue playing his role as Wilson's unwilling asset, feeding them carefully selected information that would make them confident in their control. Meanwhile, Rebecca would prepare evidence packages for simultaneous release to multiple news outlets, law enforcement agencies, and government officials. The trick is timing, Rebecca explained. We need to get your brother to safety before we reveal what we know. Once we go public, Wilson will have nothing to lose. Tommy's phone rang. Wilson's voice was cold and suspicious. Time for a face-to-face update. Same location as before, 1 hour. He wants to meet, Tommy told Rebecca after hanging up. Perfect. That gives us time to set the next phase. Rebecca handed him a small device that looked like a pen. Recording device. Get him talking about the assassination contracts, about your brother, anything that proves what they're doing. Tommy pocketed the device, but he was worried. Wilson's not stupid. He'll be suspicious if I start asking too many questions. You don't need to ask questions. Just let him talk. Men like him love explaining how clever they are. An hour later, Tommy was back in the sterile interrogation room, facing Wilson across the metal table. The man's cold eyes studied Tommy's face carefully, looking for any sign of deception. Well, Wilson asked simply. She's interested, Tommy reported. Attracted to military men, just like you said. I'm meeting her again tonight. What did you learn about her investigation? Tommy had rehearsed this part carefully. She's been tracking military contractor fraud, but she doesn't have concrete proof of anything. She's frustrated because her sources have been drying up. Wilson smiled, and Tommy activated the recording device. Of course they have. We've been very thorough about cleaning up loose ends. Cleaning up? The whistleblower, who supposedly jumped from his apartment. He was about to testify about Ghost Unit contracts. The accountant with the heart attack, he'd discovered payments that didn't officially exist. Wilson leaned back in his chair. We're very good at what we do, Tommy. Tommy felt sick, but he kept his expression neutral. How many? 12 confirmed eliminations in the past 18 months. Plus your brother's imprisonment, which has been surprisingly effective leverage. Wilson's smile was genuinely pleased with himself. The beauty is that no one suspects such as guards. We have access to everywhere, we're invisible in plain sight, and we have official cover for being armed. The recording device was capturing everything. Tommy just needed to keep Wilson talking. What happens after the journalist is eliminated? We continue our work. There's a parliamentary aide asking uncomfortable questions about defense budgets. A civil rights lawyer who's representing families of some of our targets. A banker who's been tracking suspicious financial transfers. Wilson shrugged. The work never stops. Tommy realized with growing horror that Rebecca's investigation had barely scratched the surface. Ghost Unit wasn't just a small assassination team. They were running a systematic campaign of murder to protect a much larger conspiracy. Who gives you the orders? Tommy asked. Wilson's eyes narrowed slightly. That's not your concern. Your concern is completing your assignment. He leaned forward. Tell me exactly what she knows about Ghost Unit. This was the critical moment. Tommy needed to sell the lie that would keep Wilson confident while buying time for Rebecca's plan. She suspects Ghost Unit exists, but she can't prove it. She has financial records showing payments to shell companies, but she can't connect them to specific operations. She knows about some of the deaths, but she thinks they're separate incidents. Wilson relaxed slightly. Good. Keep it that way. What's her timeline for publication? She's planning to run a story next week, but it'll be mostly speculation without hard evidence. She's hoping her editor will approve it, but she's not confident. Perfect. Wilson stood up. Tomorrow night, you'll arrange to meet her somewhere private. We'll handle the rest. Tommy felt his blood turn cold. You want me to set her up for assassination? I want you to save your brother's life, Wilson replied coldly, unless you'd prefer to watch him die slowly. As if on cue, one of the security officers brought in a tablet showing live video feed. Tommy's brother Michael was in what looked like a basement cell, clearly weakened but alive. Someone off camera spoke to T, and Michael looked directly into the camera. Tommy, Michael said, his voice hoarse. Don't trust them. Whatever they've told you, don't. The feed cut off. Wilson watched Tommy's reaction carefully. 24 hours, Tommy. Don't make us both regret this arrangement. Tommy left the meeting with Wilson's threats ringing in his ears, and his brother's desperate warning haunting his thoughts. The recording device had captured enough evidence to destroy Ghost Unit, but only if they could execute Rebecca's plan perfectly. He met Rebecca at the bookshop, where she'd been working feverishly to coordinate their counterattack. Detective Inspector Chen was there now, along with 2 other plainclothes officers Tommy didn't recognize. Did you get it? Rebecca asked immediately. Tommy played back Wilson's confession, and the room fell silent as they listened to his casual description of 12 assassinations. When it ended, D.I. Chen looked sick. Jesus Christ, she whispered. I knew the deaths were connected, but I never imagined the scale of this. It gets worse, Tommy said, and told them about Wilson's plans for future targets. He's not just covering up Ghost Unit's existence, they're systematically eliminating anyone who threatens some larger conspiracy. Rebecca had been busy while he was gone. The laptop showed multiple screens with news articles, financial records, and government documents. I've been digging deeper into the financial trail. The payments to Ghost Unit's shell companies aren't coming from official defense budgets. They're coming from private accounts controlled by a consortium of defense contractors, politicians, and foreign investors. She pulled up a diagram showing the connections. This isn't just about assassination contracts. It's about manipulating government policy by eliminating people who threaten extremely profitable defense deals. E.I. Chen studied the diagram. This implicates members of parliament, defense ministers, and military contractors at the highest levels. Which is why they're so desperate to stop anyone from exposing it, Rebecca said. And why they won't hesitate to kill us all if they suspect we're onto them. Tommy's phone buzzed with a text from Wilson. Midnight tomorrow. Location to follow. Have her there. Wilson wants me to deliver you to them tomorrow night, Tommy told Rebecca. That's when they'll try to kill you. Good, Rebecca said, surprising him. That's exactly what we want. She outlined the final phase of their plan. Tommy would agree to Wilson's demands, but instead of delivering Rebecca to her death, they would set up their own ambush. D.I. Chen's team would be positioned to arrest Wilson and his men, while Rebecca's evidence packages would be released simultaneously to ensure the story couldn't be suppressed. The key is timing, Chen explained. We need to rescue your brother at the same moment we arrest Wilson. If there's any delay, they'll kill him. Rebecca had been tracking Ghost Unit's activities and had identified their most likely holding location, an abandoned warehouse in East London that had been leased by one of their shell companies. Satellite imagery showed unusual security measures and recent activity. My team will hit the warehouse while Wilson's people are focused on the ambush, Chen said, but we only get one chance at this. Tommy felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. If anything went wrong, Michael would die, Rebecca would be killed, and the conspiracy would continue claiming victims. There's one more problem, Tommy said. Wilson isn't stupid. He'll have contingency plans, backup teams, ways to escape if things go wrong. Rebecca smiled grimly. That's why we're not just going to arrest him, we're going to completely destroy his organization. She showed them her final preparation evidence packages that would be simultaneously delivered to every major news outlet, law enforcement agency and government oversight committee in the UK. The story would break simultaneously across multiple platforms, making it impossible to suppress or discredit. Even if Wilson escapes, his organization will be finished, Rebecca explained. The publicity will make it impossible for them to continue operating. Over the next 24 hours they refined every detail of the plan. Tommy practiced his role, making sure he could sell the deception to Wilson, while secretly coordinating with the arrest team. Rebecca prepared her evidence packages and coordinated with her media contacts. Di Chen positioned her teams for the simultaneous operations. As midnight approached, Tommy received the location from Wilson, a construction site in South London, isolated and perfect for an assassination. Tommy shared the coordinates with the arrest team, and everyone moved into position. Remember, Chen told Tommy over his earpiece, we need Wilson to incriminate himself clearly before we move. Get him talking about the assassination contracts, about holding your brother. We need absolute proof his crimes. Tommy approached the construction site with Rebecca, both of them wearing hidden recording devices and GPS trackers. The area was dark and deserted, exactly the kind of place where someone could disappear forever. Wilson was waiting with 3 other men, all dressed in dark clothes and armed. Tommy recognized the cold professionalism. These were killers, not regular security personnel. Miss Morrison, Wilson said politely as they approached. I understand you've been asking questions about Ghost Unit. Rebecca played her role perfectly, showing just the right amount of fear mixed with journalistic curiosity. I know you've been murdering people to cover up government corruption. Wilson laughed. Murdering? Such an ugly word. We prefer to think of it as problem-solving. Tommy activated his recording device as Wilson began explaining exactly how Ghost Unit operated, who they'd killed, and why Rebecca had to die. It was everything they needed for a conviction, if they survived the next few minutes. Wilson continued talking, his arrogance making him careless about the evidence he was providing. Through his earpiece, Tommy could hear Di Chen confirming that her team at the warehouse had located Michael and was preparing to move. The beauty of our operation, Wilson was saying, is that we're completely deniable. Ceremonial guards who don't officially exist, contracts that are never recorded, and victims who conveniently have accidents. He gestured to his men, who began moving to surround Tommy and Rebecca. Your brother was getting too close to the truth, Miss Morrison. Just like you. But don't worry, his death will be back quicker than yours. That was the signal Di Chen had been waiting for. Suddenly, the construction site was flooded with light as armed police officers emerged from concealment positions. Armed police, drop your weapons. Wilson's men reached for their guns, but they were outnumbered and outpositioned. 2 surrendered immediately, but the 3rd opened fire before being dropped by police marksmen. Wilson himself tried to run, but was walled by officers before he made it 20 yards. David Wilson, Di Chen announced as she handcuffed him, you're under arrest for conspiracy to murder, kidnapping, and multiple counts of assassination. Wilson's face showed shock, then rage as he realized he'd been completely outmaneuvered. You have no idea what you've done, he snarled at Tommy. The people we work for don't accept failure. They'll kill everyone involved in this. They're welcome to try, Chen replied, but it's going to be hard to organize anything from prison. Tommy's earpiece crackled with good news. Target secured, came the report from the warehouse team. Michael Henderson is alive and being transported to hospital. Medical says he's weakened but will recover fully. Over the next few hours, the carefully coordinated plan unfolded perfectly. As Wilson and his men were being processed, Rebecca's evidence packages were released simultaneously to news outlets across the UK and internationally. By dawn, the Ghost Unit scandal was front-page news everywhere. The financial conspiracy Wilson had been protecting began unraveling immediately. Within days, 3 members of Parliament had resigned, a defence minister was under investigation, and several major defence contractors were facing fraud charges. Tommy was reunited with Michael at the hospital, where his brother was recovering from his 2-year ordeal. "I knew you'd figure it out," Michael said weakly. "When I heard you were SAS, I knew you'd have the skills to stop them." "I didn't stop them alone," Tommy replied, looking at Rebecca, who was fielding phone calls from journalists around the world. She's the one who had the courage to investigate when everyone else was afraid. Di Chen joined them with an update on the arrests. "We've rounded up 12 Ghost Unit operatives so far, plus 15 people involved in the financial conspiracy. Wilson is cooperating in exchange for a lighter sentence. Apparently, he's more afraid of his former employers than he is of prison." The investigation revealed that Ghost Unit had been even more extensive than they'd imagined. Operating under the cover of ceremonial duties, they'd carried out assassinations not just in the UK but across Europe, always making the deaths sex accidental or natural. "The scary thing," Rebecca told Tommy as they watched the news coverage, "is how close they came to succeeding. If you hadn't recognized that tattoo, if you hadn't been brave enough to trust me with the truth, dozens more people would have died." Tommy thought about all the near misses, how easily he could have followed Wilson's orders, how close Michael had come to disappearing forever, how many victims Ghost Unit might have claimed if their conspiracy hadn't been exposed. "What happens now?" he asked. Rebecca smiled, but there was exhaustion in her eyes. "Now comes the hard part. Trials, investigations, rebuilding trust in institutions that were completely compromised. It'll take years to clean up this mess." Di Chen approached with final updates. "Wilson's confirmed that Ghost Unit was planning to eliminate 17 more targets over the next 6 months. Your actions didn't just save lives, you prevented a systematic campaign of political assassination." As Tommy watched the news coverage showing Wilson and his men being led away in handcuffs, he thought about the chain of events that had brought them to this point. A single tattoo, bleached for just a moment, had unraveled a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. 3 months later, Tommy was back with his SAS unit, but the experience had changed him. He'd learned that sometimes the greatest threats to democracy came from within, and that ordinary people had the power to stop even the most sophisticated conspiracies if they were brave enough to act. Rebecca's Pulitzer Prize-winning series on the Ghost Unit scandal had led to major reforms in government oversight and military contracting. Michael had recovered from his ordeal and returned to intelligence work, now focused on preventing the kind of corruption that had nearly killed him. Wilson received a life sentence, but more importantly, the conspiracy he'd served was completely destroyed. The financial network funding political assassinations was dismantled, the officials who'd hired Ghost Unit were imprisoned, and new safeguards were put in place to prevent similar operations. Sometimes Tommy still thought about that moment when he'd first spotted Wilson's tattoo. Such